A racist man mocks a black waiter, forcing him to play piano. But when the music starts, the room goes silent, and by the end, the millionaire is shaking, his face soaked in tears. What just happened will leave you in tears too. The silverware clinks against fine china, the hum of conversation blending with the soft jazz drifting from the restaurant's speakers. Crystal chandeliers cast a golden glow over the dimly lit room, where powerful men in tailored suits sip expensive wine, discussing fortunes and empires. At the center of it all sits Mr. Langston, a man who has never been told no. His presence commands attention, his wealth shaping the world around him like an artist sculpting marble. But tonight, he is bored. He leans back in his chair, swirling the deep red liquid in his glass, eyes scanning the restaurant. His gaze lands on a black waiter, moving swiftly between tables, his posture poised, his expression unreadable. Elijah. A smirk tugs at Langston's lips. His fingers tap against the rim of his glass, an idea forming. He lifts a hand and snaps his fingers. "You there." Elijah pauses, adjusting the tray in his grip. "Yes, sir." Langston tilts his head, his smirk widening. "Tell me something, boy. You ever played a real piano before?" The table chuckles. A few guests from nearby tables glance over, sensing something unfolding. Elijah stiffens. The word boy lingers in the air, heavy, unspoken, but unmistakable. He keeps his expression even, measured. "I don't play, sir. I only serve." Langston laughs, shaking his head. "Oh, come on. A man like you, surely you've had your hands on a piano before." Another man at the table, grinning over his whiskey, nudges Langston. Maybe he thinks he's too good for it. Elijah clenches his jaw. They are baiting him. Langston digs into his pocket, pulls out a crisp $100 bill, and flicks it onto the piano sitting in the corner of the restaurant. The bill lands on the polished surface like a challenge. "Let's see what you've got," Langston says. His voice is amused, but beneath it, there is a test, a spectacle, a demand. The restaurant grows quieter. Some guests turn away, unwilling to witness what's about to happen. Others lean in, entertained. Elijah knows this game. He's seen it before. He's lived it before. They don't expect talent. They expect entertainment, a performance, a joke. His hands tighten around the tray. He could walk away. He could refuse. But then, Langston speaks again. "What's wrong?" The billionaire's smirk deepens. "Scared to be put on display? Scared we won't like what we hear?" Laughter. It's a challenge he can't ignore. Elijah slowly exhales. Without a word, he places his tray down. His feet feel heavy as he walks toward the grand piano, the silence thickening with every step. The restaurant watches, waiting for humiliation. Elijah pulls out the bench, his fingers hovering over the keys. A long breath. Then, the first note rings out, and the entire room stops breathing. The moment Elijah's fingers touch the keys, something shifts in the air. The first note is soft, deliberate, a sound so full of depth that the restaurant's hum of conversation dies instantly. The laughter, the smirks, the arrogance, all of it evaporates. Mr. Langston leans back, brow furrowing. He wasn't expecting this. Elijah lets the melody guide him, his hands moving effortlessly across the piano, each note carrying something deeper than sound, something personal. This song isn't just music. It's a story. Years ago, in a small apartment with cracked walls and faded curtains, a much younger Elijah sat at an old upright piano, feet barely reaching the pedals. His father, Daniel Greaves, stood beside him, guiding his hands across the keys. "Music," his father would say, "isn't just something you play. It's something you feel. If you don't feel it, neither will they." Daniel was a pianist unlike any other. His hands could bring silence to the loudest room, could make even the toughest men cry. But more than that, he was Elijah's world. Elijah lived for those lessons, for the nights when his father would play something soft, something aching, something full of stories too big for words. But one night, the music stopped. It was supposed to be a normal evening. His father had a performance, one of his biggest yet. Elijah had begged to go, but his mother told him to stay home. He sat by the piano that night, waiting, imagining the sound of his father playing in some grand concert hall, until the phone rang. And then, Everything shattered. A heart attack. Sudden. Fatal. His father collapsed on stage, never to rise again. Elijah's world turned silent. For weeks, he refused to touch the piano. The music that once felt like home now felt like a ghost. Then, one afternoon, he came home to find strangers carrying the piano out the door. His mother stood in the hallway, arms wrapped around herself, tired, defeated. "We need the money," she whispered, as if saying it softly would make it hurt less. Elijah wanted to scream, to fight, but what could he do? They had nothing. From that moment on, music was no longer his future. Survival was. Now, sitting at the grand piano in a restaurant filled with people who look down on him, Elijah plays the same melody his father once played for him. The notes are full of grief, defiance, and something deeper, something unspoken. Langston's fingers tighten around his wineglass. He shifts in his seat, his jaw clenched. The smirk is gone. Elijah plays as if he's pouring out everything he's ever lost. His father, his home, his dreams. He plays for the boy who was forced to let go of everything that made him feel alive. The song builds, aching and raw. Someone at a nearby table lets out a shaky breath, dabbing at their eyes. The whispers begin. Where did he learn to play like that? I thought he was just a waiter. Langston watches, but his face is unreadable. Because something about this song, it's familiar. He doesn't understand why, but something deep in his chest tightens. Elijah plays on, unaware that with every note, he is pulling something buried and broken out of the man who tried to humiliate him. And the night is far from over. The melody drifts through the restaurant, wrapping around every guest like an unseen force, silencing even the most careless whispers. No one is eating anymore. No one is speaking. The laughter that once filled the air is gone, replaced by something else. Awe. The weight of the music presses down on the room, forcing everyone to listen. The once dismissive patrons, men in expensive suits, women in designer dresses, sit motionless, their gazes locked onto the black waiter who was never supposed to be more than a joke. At the head of the table, Langston grips his wineglass tighter, his knuckles white. His confident smirk is gone. His brow furrows, eyes dark with something unreadable, something uncomfortable. The song should not be affecting him like this. It's just a performance, just music. So why does it feel like something more? Langston shifts in his chair, clearing his throat, as if trying to shake the feeling off. But his body betrays him. His heartbeat is loud in his ears, each note pulling at something buried deep within him, something forgotten, something he forced himself to forget. His dinner guests glance at him, sensing the shift. One of them chuckles, trying to bring back the mood. "Well, damn," a man in a navy blue suit murmurs, swirling his whiskey. "Didn't think he actually knew how to play." Another guest smirks, leaning closer. "Guess he's not just good at carrying trays, huh?" Langston doesn't respond, because he's no longer listening to them. He's listening to the music, and that's when it happens. A memory, unbidden, unwanted, slams into him. Years ago, in a different time, in a different life, Langston was not a businessman. He was just a boy, and he had a piano teacher, a black man, a man who had tried, so hard, to teach him that music wasn't about money or power or control. It was about emotion, passion, truth. But Langston, even as a child, had been too arrogant, too stubborn to listen. "You don't listen, boy," his teacher had told him, shaking his head after yet another wasted lesson. "You play the notes, but you don't feel them. And if you can't feel them, no one else will." Langston had scoffed, rolling his eyes. Music was nothing but a tool, a hobby, a way to impress people at cocktail parties. He didn't care about feeling, he cared about winning. Eventually, he had abandoned the piano altogether, leaving that world behind. He had chosen money instead. And yet, here he is now, years later, sitting in this restaurant, staring at a man playing the very music he once ignored. And it is crushing him. The song continues to swell, powerful and raw. Langston tries to push the memory away, tries to drown it in wine, in logic, in pride. But the notes dig deeper, ripping through him like a blade. The melody is not just familiar, it is the same piece his teacher once played for him. And that realization hits him like a fist to the chest. The restaurant is no longer a restaurant. The people, the conversations, the wealth. It all fades away. All that's left is the music. And Langston is a boy again. A boy who once had a chance to be something more. A boy who chose the wrong path. A boy who is now a man, sitting in his tailored suit, listening to a stranger play the song that should have been his. His throat tightens. His hands tremble. And for the first time in his life, Langston feels small. The final note rings out. The restaurant holds its breath. Then, silence. Not a single person speaks. Not a single fork scrapes against a plate. Langston blinks rapidly, his hands still clenched around the tablecloth. His chest rises and falls, uneven, unsteady. Across the room, Elijah finally lifts his hands from the keys. He does not look at Langston. He does not need to, because he already knows. He won, and Langston knows it too. The silence in the restaurant is suffocating. The final note still lingers in the air, an invisible force pressing down on everyone. No one moves. No one speaks. It is as if the music has trapped them all in a moment that refuses to end. Langston swallows, his throat dry. His hands feel unsteady against the table. He doesn't understand why this is happening, why this song is cutting through him like a blade. And then, it clicks. This isn't just any song. It's a song from his past. A song that only one man could have played. His old piano teacher. Langston feels the room tilt slightly, his breath coming faster. His teacher. A man who dedicated his life to music. A man Langston dismissed, ignored, and abandoned. But more than that, a man who once told him something that now echoes in his mind like a ghost. I have a son. He's young now, but one day he'll be better than me. One day he'll change the world with his music. Langston's pulse pounds in his ears. His gaze locks onto Elijah, who is still sitting at the piano, back straight, eyes calm. Number it can't be. It's impossible. And yet, he knows. He knows because that song, that exact piece, was never published, never recorded. His teacher never played it for the world. He only played it for Langston. And now, decades later, Langston is sitting in a restaurant, staring at a young black man who just played that same song with the same emotion, the same depth, the same soul. Elijah isn't just some waiter. He isn't just some talented pianist. He is the son of the man Langston once called his mentor. Langston can't breathe. Elijah finally stands, pushing back from the piano bench. His expression is unreadable, but his eyes are burning. He turns, looking directly at Langston for the first time since the performance began. Langston stares back, his body tense, trapped in a moment he doesn't know how to escape. He wants to speak. He wants to demand answers, to ask if it's true, to confirm the impossible. But Elijah already knows. He has known from the moment he saw Langston sitting at that table, smug and arrogant. He has known from the moment Langston tossed that $100 bill onto the piano, like a man throwing scraps to a dog. He has known exactly who Langston was, the man who once had the world at his fingertips, but threw it all away for greed. The man his father spoke about in disappointment before he died. The man who turned his back on music, on emotion, on soul, on everything his father tried to teach him. And tonight, Elijah had one chance to do what his father never could, to make Langston listen, to make him feel. And judging by the way Langston's hands tremble, his eyes glistening with something dangerously close to regret, Elijah has succeeded. A waiter drops a plate somewhere in the distance, the porcelain shattering against the floor. The sound snaps Langston back to the present. He blinks, dragging in a shaky breath, but nothing feels real anymore. Elijah says nothing. He doesn't need to, because the music already said it all. Langston stares at him, his mind screaming with a million questions, a million regrets. But all he can do is sit there, trapped in the weight of his own past, because for the first time in his life, he is not the one in control. Elijah is, and there's nothing Langston can do to change that. The restaurant remains eerily silent, but the tension in the air is suffocating. The power in the room has shifted, and everyone feels it. Elijah stands tall, his presence commanding, while Langston, the man who once controlled every conversation in this place, sits frozen, his face pale, his breathing uneven. He grips his wine glass, but his fingers tremble so much that the liquid inside sloshes dangerously close to the rim. This isn't how tonight was supposed to go. He was supposed to laugh, to mock, to remind this boy of his place. Instead, he is the one who has been exposed. Langston forces himself to move, to shake off the weight pressing down on him. He clears his throat, sitting up straighter, reaching for the only weapon he has left, his arrogance. Where? His voice cracks, and he curses himself for it. He swallows, forces composure. Where did you learn to play like that? Elijah watches him for a long moment. Then, finally, he answers. My father taught me. Langston inhales sharply. His grip on the glass tightens, but his hands are still shaking. There it is. The truth spoken aloud. The confirmation that this is no coincidence. Elijah knows exactly who he is, and he played that song for him on purpose. Langston feels exposed in a way he never has before, like someone has taken his neatly constructed world and shattered it piece by piece. The room is still watching. They can all sense something deeper happening here, even if they don't understand it. Langston glances around, realizing that for the first time in his life, people aren't looking at him with admiration or envy. They are looking at him with something close to pity. His jaw clenches. He won't allow this. He reaches for his wallet and pulls out another crisp bill, this time $1,000. He holds it between two fingers, waving it lazily in the air. Well, I must say, that was quite the performance. He smirks, but it's hollow, forced. You sure you're just a waiter? You could make some real money if you knew how to use your talent properly. Elijah doesn't move, doesn't blink. Langston gestures to the piano with his glass. Come on, play another one. The table chuckles, a few people shaking their heads at Langston's attempt to reclaim control. Elijah finally speaks. I'm not here for your money. Langston's smirk falters. Elijah steps forward, his gaze locked onto Langston's. I'm not some street performer. I'm not some trained pet who plays on command, and I don't need your validation. The words cut through Langston like a blade. Elijah picks up the $1,000 bill from the piano, studies it for a moment, then calmly sets it back down in front of Langston. Keep it, he says quietly. Looks like you need it more than I do. The room erupts into whispers. A few of Langston's own guests choke back surprised laughter, exchanging glances. Langston feels heat crawl up his neck. The humiliation burns through him. But worse than that, the truth does. For the first time in his life, he doesn't know what to say. Elijah nods once, turning his back on him, ready to walk away, ready to leave him in the wreckage of his own past. But before he does, Langston's voice cuts through the air again. Wait. Elijah stops. Langston swallows hard. His voice is raw, strained. What was that piece called? Elijah turns his head slightly, his expression unreadable. Then, finally, he says it. It didn't have a name. Langston's heart pounds violently in his chest, because he remembers those words. He remembers his teacher sitting at the piano, playing that same song, saying the same thing. It don't have a name yet. I'm saving it for someone special. Langston's stomach twists violently. His teacher had written that song for his son, for Elijah, and tonight, Elijah played it for him. Langston feels sick, because for the first time in his life, he finally understands what true loss feels like. And the worst part? He knows he deserves it. Langston can't breathe. The air in the restaurant feels too thick, too heavy. His grip on his wine glass loosens, and for a moment he thinks he might drop it. He stares at Elijah, the weight of the past crushing him. This isn't just some waiter. This is the son of the only man who ever tried to teach him something real. The man he ignored, the man he abandoned. And the worst part? Elijah knows. The humiliation is unbearable. The entire restaurant is watching, waiting. Some people smirk, enjoying the downfall of a man who has humiliated so many. Others look away, sensing the shift, knowing they are witnessing something deeper than just another arrogant businessman being put in his place. Langston forces himself to speak. His voice is lower now, strained. Your father, he was my teacher. Elijah tilts his head slightly, as if waiting for him to continue, giving him just enough rope to hang himself with. Langston swallows. I didn't know. I didn't realize who you were. Elijah's expression remains unreadable. You never bothered to. The words slice through Langston like a knife. Because Elijah is right. He never did bother. He had spent his entire life pretending his past didn't exist, pretending that he had built himself up from nothing, when in reality there were people who tried to teach him, guide him, and he turned his back on them. And now, one of them is standing right in front of him. Langston's hands clench on the tablecloth. The weight in his chest is unbearable. He feels like he is suffocating under the weight of his own arrogance. For decades he has believed that money and power were the only things that mattered, that people were tools, that talent was only valuable if it could be controlled. But tonight, he lost control. And in losing control, he realizes he has lost so much more. A waiter moves through the tables, refilling glasses, but he skips Langston's table entirely, as if he isn't even worthy of the attention anymore. For the first time in his life, Langston is invisible. He looks at Elijah again, and his voice is barely above a whisper. I should have listened. Elijah watches him, his gaze unreadable. Then finally, he speaks. But you didn't. Langston swallows. His hands are shaking now. I can't change the past. Elijah nods slowly, considering him. No, you can't. Silence stretches between them, thick with the weight of everything unspoken. Langston feels the eyes of the room on him, waiting for his next move. For the first time, he doesn't know what to do, because money won't fix this. Power won't erase what's already been done, and there is no deal to be made. He is standing at the edge of something unfamiliar, vulnerability, and it terrifies him. Elijah finally sighs, shaking his head. You know what the worst part is, he says quietly. Langston hesitates, then shakes his head. Elijah leans in just slightly, enough for only him to hear. You could have been great. Langston's breath catches. The words land harder than an insult, heavier than any humiliation, because deep down, he knows it's true. He could have been more, and tonight, he has to live with the truth that he chose not to be. Langston sits there, completely undone. For the first time in his life, he has nothing to say. No smug remarks, no clever insults, no money to throw at the problem. He is simply a man, small, hollow, and drowning in the weight of everything he has ignored. Elijah could walk away now. He has already won. He has already proven his point. The entire restaurant saw the shift. The power is no longer in Langston's hands. But instead of leaving, Elijah does something that no one, especially Langston, expects. He pulls out the same chair Langston sits in. And he sits, not as an employee, not as someone below him, as an equal. Langston stiffens. This is worse than any humiliation, because Elijah isn't just here to witness his downfall. He is offering him something Langston has never had the courage to face. A choice. Elijah leans forward slightly, his voice steady. Tell me something, Mr. Langston. Langston swallows. He barely recognizes his own voice when he responds. What? Elijah holds his gaze. Why did you stop playing? Langston flinches. The words hit harder than expected. He doesn't answer right away. He can't, because the truth is, he doesn't know. Or maybe deep down, he does. He stopped playing because it was easier, because it didn't make money, because passion wouldn't buy him power, because he was afraid to feel something real. And now, sitting across from the son of the only man who ever tried to teach him the value of emotion, of depth, of something greater than wealth, he realizes how much he has lost. His hands curl into fists on the table. What is he supposed to say? That he was wrong, that he regrets it, that he wasted everything. He can't say it, but somehow Elijah already knows. The restaurant remains still, watching, waiting. Then, Langston does something he has never done before. He stands. Slowly, hesitantly, he reaches into his coat pocket. For a moment it looks like he's reaching for his wallet again. One last desperate attempt to buy his way out of this. But instead, he pulls out a small black leather notebook. He stares at it, rubbing his fingers over the worn cover, as if debating whether to go through with this. Then, finally, he sets it on the table. It lands between them like a final offering. Elijah glances at it, then back at Langston. What is this? Langston exhales. His voice is unsteady. My music. Elijah's expression shifts slightly. He wasn't expecting that. Langston swallows hard. forcing himself to continue. I used to write a long time ago. His jaw clenches. Before I became this. He gestures vaguely at himself, at the world he built, a world that now feels meaningless. Elijah hesitates, then reaches for the notebook. His fingers brush against the cover, and for a moment, there is something between them that wasn't there before. Understanding. Langston clears his throat, his voice raw. I don't know if it's worth anything, but I thought, maybe you'd know. A long pause. Then, Elijah nods, not in forgiveness, not in absolution, but in something else. Acknowledgement. A choice has been made. Langston will never be the man his teacher wanted him to be. He will never undo his past. But maybe, just maybe, he can start again. Elijah runs his fingers over the worn cover of the notebook, feeling the faint indentations of the handwritten music inside. Langston watches him closely, his face unreadable, yet his eyes are full of something foreign, something Elijah has never seen in him before. Humility. The restaurant remains silent, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. This is no longer about humiliation, no longer about power. This is about a man who built his entire life on wealth and arrogance, and now realizes none of it ever mattered. Elijah finally exhales, closing the notebook. He stands. Langston watches, waiting for some kind of answer, some kind of validation. But Elijah doesn't offer it. He simply looks at him, and for the first time, Langston understands. This was never about winning, never about revenge. It was about truth. Elijah gives him a small, almost imperceptible nod. Not forgiveness, not acceptance, but acknowledgement. And then, without another word, he walks away. The notebook remains in his hands. The restaurant watches him go. Langston remains at the table, staring at the empty space Elijah left behind. For the first time in his life, he feels small. For the first time in his life, he feels human. He exhales shakily and wipes his face. He hadn't even realized he was crying. And as the weight of everything finally settles over him, one final thought echoes in his mind. You could have been great. And maybe, just maybe, it's not too late.